It's now time to introduce our special guest. We're happy to have with us tonight James Morris Hicks. Jim Hicks, a senior corporate executive for many years, began a comprehensive study of the optimal diet for humans and what we eat from a global perspective in 2002. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Industrial Engineering from Auburn University and an MBA from the University of Hawaii right here, a degree he earned while serving as an officer in the U.S. Coast Guard in Honolulu. In 2009, he earned a certificate in plant-based nutrition from Cornell and the T. Colin Campbell Center for Nutrition Studies, where he has served on the board of directors for 6 years. He published his first book, Healthy Eating, Healthy World, in 2011. 4 years later, he teamed up with a medical doctor to publish the 4-leaf Guide to Vibrant Health. As a writer, speaker, and activist, he has focused on the crucial issue of food choices in this century. His presentation tonight is entitled Food, Health, Planet, Our Future as a Species. Please join me in welcoming James Morris Hicks.
So my story begins in January of 1969, shortly after I was commissioned as officer in the United States Coast Guard. And my story starts at Travis Air Force Base in California, where I was boarding a flight to Vietnam. It was headed to Vietnam. Fortunately for me, it stopped in Honolulu for refueling, and I got off. And I spent the next three years, almost 3 years here in Honolulu. And we'll talk a little bit about that. It kind of leads into my story in terms of plant-based nutrition. Topic of my speech tonight is Food, Health, Planet, Our Future as a Species. And here I am when I arrived the next day at Base Honolulu Sand Island for my duty. And they turned over the base exchange. It was the retail operations for the Coast Guard. So that was my first retail experience, and it was right here in Honolulu. This is a few snapshots of my 2.5, 3 years here. She said I got my MBA at the University of Hawaii right here in Manoa. That was a car I drove around here. We had a bachelor's officer's quarters up Wilhelmina Rise, and that's the view up there in the left-hand corner. I did a little sailplaning with somebody else flying it. A little scuba diving on the North Shore, and also that's the Hicks Air Force Base Officers Club there. It's where I met the mother of my children, and later had our wedding reception there. So then after moving, I then had to move out of the bachelor's officers' quarters and moved into an apartment on Pule Circle right down the road here. So I feel right at home, and it's really good to be back. The last slide is, the last picture on this slide is a picture of Patty's Chinese Kitchen. Who remembers Patty's Chinese Kitchen? Well, this is the first part that we can start talking about food, because I learned to use chopsticks here. I learned to eat sticky rice. I got comfortable with Asian food, and I realized that, you know, you have to eat a lot more or you get hungry in a couple of hours. But then again, I didn't think about food for the next 17 years, 1988. And that's when I found this book. I had just run in a race, and they took my picture in the race, and you could order your picture, and my picture scared me. It looked horrible. I don't know why I bought that picture, but I'm glad I did, because I said I got to do something about my health. I was then 43 years old. And so I went to Barnes & Noble in New York City, and I found that book, Fit for Life by Harvey and Marilyn Diamond. And I read that book, and I started they advocated fruit only in the morning and minimizing the concentrated foods like meat and cheese. So I learned I actually lost weight normally, got back to my good running weight and felt really good, and then I just kind of drifted away from it. But I always knew I could come back to Harvey and Marilyn's plan if I ever needed to lose weight. But then 15 years later, in 2003, this is when I really got curious about the optimal diet for humans. And I started doing my own research, and at the time you could do it online. And you could order one book from Amazon, and they would say, you know, people that ordered this book ordered these 40 books. And so I get to order more books, and in a course of about 6 months, I had read 30 books by these guys, Furman, Ornish, and Campbell, and dozens of others, from Atkins to Zone. I was just trying to learn all that I could about it. And then around Memorial Day of 2003, I read these 2 books over the same weekend. You guys familiar with John Robbins and Howard Lyman? Well, they've become, all of these guys are now my friends and colleagues. I've gotten to know everybody in the field. But up until that Memorial Day, I had been thinking just about human health, my health. And then I realized, after reading Diet for New America and Mad Cowboy, that weekend I had what I later referred to as my blinding flash of the obvious when I said, oh my God, we are eating the wrong food on this planet. So you fast forward another 10 years, and as I learned more and more about the consequences of our food choices, I ultimately concluded that what we eat is the most important issue in the history of humanity. And if you say, well, how can you be so sure about that? Well, because I think the future of humanity is determined by our food choices, and what can be more important than the future of humanity to humans. In the last 2 years, I've kind of realized that we weren't moving fast enough with our food choices. I'm talking about as a global community, in order to nurture the ecosystem that sustains all of us. And I started focusing more on sustainability of the ecosystem and our future as a species. And that's the topic that I want to share with you tonight, the big picture view of that topic. To help me look at the big picture, Dr. E.O. Wilson. Anybody heard of him? He is a famous biologist at Harvard University, Pulitzer Prize winner. He's probably written 50 or 60 books, and this was one of his most recent books called The Meaning of Human Existence, which I highly recommend. But he talked about our galaxy in that book. He said, our galaxy, I didn't realize just how many planets there were, but our galaxy has billions of planets and is just one of billions of galaxies in the universe. And when you start thinking about the big picture, we're talking about the big picture in a real small place compared to the universe. And so Dr. Wilson explained how Earth relates to the universe. And he said, as the second segment of the left antennae of an aphid sitting on a flower petal in Teaneck, New Jersey for a few hours this afternoon. That's how he said Earth relates to the universe as that relates to the Earth. So that kind of puts things in perspective. And I don't mean to minimize this, but it's a big deal to us. It may be a small deal to the rest of the universe, but it's obviously a big deal to us, and we have to save Earth's ability to sustain us. So I want to start at the beginning. Life began here on planet Earth about 4 billion years ago, when the first forms of life started evolving. Humans emerged as a species just 200,000 years ago. Now, that's kind of hard for a lot of people to put their arms around, you know. And so I had the opportunity to speak to a 6th grade class in April of 2013, and I came up with a way to explain it to the 6th grade class. So I call it middle school math, and if they can understand it, everybody here should have no problem. And so there I am in New London, Connecticut. That picture appeared in the newspaper. I spoke to all of their classes over the period of the week. They're looking up at me, and I'm talking about the big picture of sustainability. Putting our time on Earth in perspective, So if we crammed all 4 billion years of life into 1 year, human beings have been here 26 minutes of the last day of the last year. 26 minutes. So if you look back and say, well, what's happened during that period of time? Humans started 200,000 years ago. It took us 199,800 years to hit the 1 billion mark. And in the next 200 years, we went to 7.6 billion that we are today. In that imaginary year, that 200 years is like 2 seconds. So in 2 seconds of that last year, we went from 1 billion to 7.6 billion. That's how things are getting out of control. So from the rich harmony of nature, in 2 seconds of that year, we went from that to this horrible visual illustration of how we humans are trashing the only planet in the universe capable of sustaining us. Now, along the way, we caused some problems in a number of areas. And I came up with this slide about 3 or 4 years ago. 4 things that we do that really are unsustainable in our planet. It's real simple. This was in the 6th grade class presentation, by the way. Overpopulation. We are adding 230,000 net population increase every day. Every 4 days, that's like adding a new Honolulu to the world's population. That's one problem. Global economy and the consumption of stuff. We have an economy that's global economy based on the maximization of the consumption of stuff in a world of finite resources. Middle school math tell you that won't work. And our fossil fuel dependence is kind of driven by those 2 issues there. And then it's our food choices. So for most of my time since 2003, I've talked almost exclusively about the food choices. And I would always say if we can change those food choices, we can do so much good, it'll buy us enough time to fix those other 3 things. And now I'm realizing that we're running out of time, and I'll show you why in the next few slides. So urgently needed changing our food choices. And that's a family of 4 in North Carolina. That's their weekly consumption of food right there in that picture. It's about $350 worth. And they need to change that. Our food choices give us hope. Some people say from time to time, one of them is in the room tonight, that says that sometimes my work is too much doom and gloom. Well, you know, I'm an engineer, and I gotta get the facts before I can solve a problem. So I think if there's just a few of us that have had the benefit, had the privilege of really studying all of these things and how they're connected, and if we don't tell the truth about what we've learned, then I think we're letting down our fellow man. So I haven't given up hope, and I'll never give up hope. But I will present the facts as I see them, and hopefully that's okay with you. But we do have hope, and our food choices give us because of their incredible power to promote health, hope, and harmony on planet Earth, and that's been my tagline since I wrote my first book. So what's the big deal about food in the ecosystem? Well, it's a factor of 10. 10 times as much land. This is on a per calorie basis. Animal-based foods take 10 times as much land, 10 times as much water, and over 10 times as much energy. That simply doesn't work in the long run, and I won't dwell on that, but that's really what it all boils down to. What we eat kind of determines how the earth is used. So what can we hope for? Well, you all know these things about what our food choices are driving, but we could return millions of acres to forests, greatly reduce the #1 cause of climate change, but we may have waited too long, and that's why we need to jump in and work on more than food choices. The world needs to get to work on these big things like overpopulation, which is going to take a long time to fix. So, going back, how many people can the planet support? You know, we've got 7.6 billion, so let's start at the beginning. How many people can we actually support on this planet? Well, the Global Footprint Network people said that that number is 2 billion if everybody was living at the lifestyle of the average European. Well, it gets worse. If everybody lives at the lifestyle of the average American, it would take, this planet can only sustain 1 billion people. And every day people are moving toward our lifestyle. So the number is going down. Now, I computed based on the fact that if everybody did shift to eating a whole food plant-based diet, that even Europeans, the planet could probably support 4 billion people maybe at the European lifestyle. So I'm a little bit more optimistic than the Global Footprint Network people because I know the power of food to change everything. Overpopulation. How are we going to fix that? Well, I'm going to talk about what needs to be fixed, not necessarily how to fix it. If you take the births minus deaths that we have today, 230,000 people a day, and you reduce the births to 100,000 a day, that's the key. Deaths stay the same. That results in an annual decrease of 22 million people. It would take 45 years to lower the population by 1 billion. And we're not even slowed down our population, but that's what it would take. And so we'd still be growing during all those years. So we'd need 160 years to hit that 4 billion mark. And so how do we do that? The details are above my job grade. I'm pointing out what I think needs to be done based on my study. Overconsumption, we're going to have, in addition to a whole new way of eating and a reduction of population, our global economy based on growth and unlimited growth in a world of finite resources got to stop. We're currently producing for profit and growth. Someday that economy has got to change, and we must be treating Mother Nature as our client, and everything must be built in harmony. Sustainability must trump profits and growth. Maybe the UN makes the rules and enforces the new rules. And I like to say here, it shocks some people, but I think someday a crime punishable by death might be eating meat. Because in effect, you're killing your mother. Like James Cameron in Avatar said, we're killing our mother. And I think killing your mother, they punish you by death in a lot of countries for doing that. So it sounds extreme to say it, but I think we have to get really serious if we want to save this planet. Green cities are built worldwide. All these wonderful things can happen, and again, the details are above my job grade, and even if I knew all the details, I don't have nearly enough time tonight to tell you those. So let's go to how we doing on fossil fuels. Well, that's a 747, which is just about out of service now. But on the typical long-haul flight that my wife and I took from New York this past Sunday, it requires 110 tons of fuel for one flight. Now, this is great because that's a 747, and that reminds me that if you got 350 people on that airplane, each person is responsible for 747 pounds of fuel for that one flight. So how are we doing on fossil fuels? What's going to have to happen there? Well, we got to have green energy. We can't be burning this dirty stuff forever. We have to have less foreign trade, so things are local. We don't have to spend energy to move stuff around the world. We don't have air travel all over the place. We have internet now, so we can communicate in pictures and video. Green food production. Fossil fuels can drop by 90% if we got all that right, but you might guess it that those details are above my job grade. Now, look at the graph. I love graphs. The fossil fuels are up there at the top. Coal, oil, natural gas. You don't see any slippage there. They continue to go up as we add 230,000 people a day. More people every day want to eat our food and drive cars and have air conditioning, and we all want that. Down at the bottom is the renewables, and they are crawling along, but the other ones are going up more every year. So we're using more of all of them. So why are our food choices so important? They determine how the planet is used. They have a huge impact on our health. And then they're the #1 driver of cost of health care, deforestation, soil erosion, ocean acidification, species extinction, climate change, and much, much more. Unbridled growth of our civilized population is what relates to all of those problems in number 3. So what's going on with the food choices? I have 4 families there. 2 are from Chad. One is from Chad, one from Ecuador, one from the United States, and one from Germany. Well, actually the Germans spend slightly more money on food per week than we do. Looks like they also drink beer, more beer than we do. But the people eating the plants are still eating what their ancestors 1,000 years ago ate, which is just plants, and they're spending less than $50 a week for each family, and they're big families. So what's going on with those food choices? Well, a lot of those people from Chad and Ecuador are starting to eat the way we eat. And so these are calories per day by region. And notice every one of the lines is going up. Industrialized countries, developing countries, South Asia, Sub-Saharan, every single country is going up in calories per day total. And it's even more if you count this is per person. So I mentioned the future of our species. So we got to use the word extinction, because species of animals and birds and insects, they go through cycles and they go extinct. And so we have to talk about this. August 2010 report from the UN. 150 to 200 species of plant and animal life go extinct every single day. Most of them we've not even identified yet, but they're going extinct every 24 hours. Could humans become extinct? And God, I hope not, but let's take a look at history and science. This is what engineers do. Easter Island. Who's familiar with Easter Island? You guys are all islanders. Well, it's off the coast of Chile. It's about 1/10 the size of Oahu. And this is Easter Island. Kind of looks like Hawaii before the humans arrived. And the humans arrived around 500 AD. The Polynesians came in by boats, probably like some of the original people that settled here. And this is after 1,200 years of human stewardship. You may have seen the pictures of the stone god. Some of these things weigh up to 80 tons. Can you imagine a primitive civilization figuring out how to build those things and then move them around? I mean, they were a pretty advanced civilization. They didn't have machines and they didn't have computers, but they had a lot of things going for them. But they didn't take into account, you know, imagine if you had to feed everybody on Oahu with just stuff grown on Oahu. You'd be in big trouble overnight, right? But these people had no trading partners. So this is a classic laboratory situation of what do you do if you can't go anywhere else? It's like being on planet Earth. That was their planet Earth. They didn't have any place to go. They had no other trading partners to bring them food and supplies. So the end of that story was the Dutch showed up on Easter Sunday of 1722. So our original humans there spent about 1,000 years, give or take. They got to about 20,000 people. And then all hell broke loose. The trees had all gone. They'd just totally, their lifestyle had wrecked the ecosystem. The species started dying and humans started dying. And so when the Dutch settlers got there, there were just maybe a few hundred, maybe 1,000 people left that become cannibals. It was a horrible existence, almost worse than death. So let's take a look at science. That was the historical part of it. A few more big picture scientists. Dr. E.O. Wilson is one of those scientists, but I have 7 or 8 more here I'm going to briefly talk about. The thing about science is most scientists specialize in something very finite part of the world, and therefore few of them ever really get the big picture of how everything fits together. And they get paid by entities that basically dictate what they can say about what their science is. So I've got a few big picture scientists that I have found in my research, and they tend to agree on a lot of things. By the way, bold views, even if they discovered some things that didn't fly right with the university. Colin Campbell is an example, a colleague of mine. His career took a mighty blow once his science started implicating animal foods, and it continues to this day. So Jacques Cousteau, everybody's heard of Jacques Cousteau, right? He was a great environmentalist. I thought of him as a scuba diving guy when I was growing up, but he was a great scientist. And he was a good friend of Ted Turner, who I know, and I know his family. And he told Ted Turner this in the biography that I read of Ted's life, that humankind may or may not be part of the plan that nature has for the earth in the future. Life will be reborn, but first the world as we know it will die. He said that in 1997. He died later that year at the age of 87. I noticed several of these guys are old guys that say that. So young guys don't want to talk about it too much. But I'm not proving anything here. I'm just showing you some relevant information from people who have credibility. Anybody heard of Frank Fenner? Australian, there you go. He is a big deal. He was the lead medical doctor in the international team that eradicated smallpox from the planet, the lead guy. He is an environmentalist, an MD, a scientist. He said at 2010, at the age of 95, and by the way, he died later that year, Homo sapiens will become extinct, perhaps within 100 years. It's an irreversible situation. I think it's too late, he said. Peter Wadhams. He's still alive. He's younger than I am. I met him a couple of months ago. He is the world's leading authority, scientific authority on the Arctic Ocean. He's made 40 expeditions there, submarines, surface ships, and he just wrote the book Farewell to Ice. I don't know if you follow what's happening with climate change, but the Arctic is warming much faster than the rest of the world, and as the Arctic loses its ice, the albedo effect changes, and there's more heat absorbed into the ocean, and there's feedback loops, and it just keeps going faster and faster. When he talks about bad news, I got to learn from him, because he smiles and he chuckles, and it doesn't sound so bad when he's talking about it. But he did say the IPCC, which is Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the international panel, he says they are guilty of conspiracy of complacency, because they're really not telling us how bad things are, because it would upset the world economy. So Dr. Wadhams is a real superstar. Stephen Amott, I have met him. He could be one of the most informed people in the world as a big picture with scientist with access to incredible amounts of information. He's with Microsoft in the UK. He's a professor at the University of Oxford. He manages a team of people, of young scientists and engineers whose 100% job is studying processes around the world that are important to the future of humanity. I mean, how big a picture do you get than that? So I read his book in 2013. I saw him later that year in London, and this was the last sentence in his book. And he was dead serious. And I said, well, Dr. Emmott, let me ask you a question. If we could get everybody, if we could get 80% of the world's wealthiest people, who are the ones that are eating most of the meat, dairy, egg, and fish, if we can get them to reduce that animal food consumption by 75, 80%, would you still end your book with that sentence? And he said, well, I can't answer that without doing some computations, but he said, if that dietary shift were universally done in this world, it would have an unimaginable positive impact on the ecosystem that sustains it. So he knows, and through his work, he wasn't eating plant-based all the time, but he's moving definitely in that direction. Really smart man. James Lovelock, the oldest one, is alive and well at 98, and he never worked for anybody except as a contractor. So he always did his own studies, and I just recently found him maybe 6 or 8 months ago in a BBC film that he was in 2010. He said, when you see the whole picture, it really is fearsomely bad. And then he says, if the earth improves as the result of our presence, then we will flourish. If it doesn't, we will die out. That's like any other species. That's why species go extinct. His theory was called the Gaia theory, and it was everything the Earth and its ecosystem manages itself. And if there's entities and species that are upsetting things, they go away and other species come in. So if the Earth improves as a result of our presence, human presence, we will flourish. Well, remember that picture? That doesn't look like improvement to me. And then everybody in the room, I think, knows my colleague T. Colin Campbell, and so I won't have much to say there except that quote that you may not have heard him say is, the closer we get to eating a diet of whole plant-based foods, the better off we will be, and no less than our future as a species hangs in the balance. So he's on board with that big picture. I asked him about some of these other doctors recently, as late as this summer, and about what he thought about their, quote, doom and gloom, and he says, well, as a scientist, I can't argue against it. I'm like you, Jim, I hope it doesn't happen, but we're moving in the wrong direction. So, of all those scientists that I listed, Colin Campbell is the only one that's not afflicted with this problem called the protein myth, and I call it the protein myth and locked brains, because I think this is the single biggest problem we have in the world, because 90% of the most educated, most powerful, most influential, wealthiest people in the world, 90% of them, or over 90, believe that we truly need to eat animal protein to be healthy. Therefore, we're paralyzed. That prevents incredibly powerful plant-based solutions to our most serious health, hunger, and sustainability issues from even making it to the table for consideration. Bill McKibben, he's fairly famous for starting 350.org. He's a Harvard grad. You see him, he's been arrested a dozen times for doing sit-ins and things like that, fighting climate change. He's a really hardcore activist, teaches at Middlebury College. This past spring, a year ago this month, he said, to be entirely honest, we don't know for sure we can slow down global warming enough to matter. We've waited a very long time to get started. Well, Bill, I would argue we haven't started. That's the data through 2013, and it's on parts per million CO2 year by year going up over 400 in 2013, and they recorded right here in Mauna Loa, I don't know if you know that, the observatory station there, 409.66 was last month right here in Hawaii. And there's no slowing down. In fact, the graph has turned exponential there, as you can see. Now, so what about the rest of human history? We've been here 200,000 years. That graph is 600,000 years. And we had never been above that line for 650,000 years. Here's how long we've been here, about this point, and now we're there, and we're not slowing down. Robert Goodland, you've probably not heard of him, but he was at the World Bank. I also got to know him right before he died. He died in 2013. He and his partner published a study that's, you can find it in worldwatch.org, where he said and computed, right after the UN came out with a different number, but he said that livestock and their byproducts account for at least 51% of all climate change. And then, since nothing happened for the next 4 years, he readjusted his data, and he said now there appears to be only one remaining pragmatic way to reverse climate change before it's too late, and that's by taking quick and large-scale action in food, agriculture, and forestry. So he passed on that later that year. When I first heard him say that we need to cut out 25% of it, I said, that's not going to work. You got to go for 100, or you're never going to get 75. So but he died. The government officials, IPCC, no one ever picked up his work, but it's being borne out that what he said was true, but not soon enough. So what's happening with the climate change? Well, here's the Greenland Ice Sheet mass. That's the one they're worried about, most worried for sea level rise. Because if that whole ice sheet goes, we're talking about 10 meters and things like that, sea level rise, those sort of things. This is since 1979, but this is on an annual basis, and these are the past 2 years. Notice how uniform it's been. This is throughout the year. That's the global sea ice area, and how it's popped away from those norms in just the last 2 years, which to me looks like what we call a tipping point, which is kind of scary because they say, thing about tipping points, once you can recognize it, it's too late. Some of you people are scientists. I see you nodding your heads. This is sea ice volume. Dr. Wadhams made me aware of this. Most people talk about the area of sea ice, but he computes the volume by taking the depth of the sea ice. That's what's happening to the volume of the sea ice in the Arctic since 1979. And that's a pretty steep, clear graph. Now, albedo, I mentioned that earlier, it's a case of blue and white. When you have white ocean, frozen year-round, it's reflecting 87% of the heat back into the atmosphere. When that melts, the sun hits the water and absorbs 80% of it, and then that causes the air to warm more, and you melt more ice, and it's a self-reinforcing feedback loop that Dr. Wadhams is all too aware of. I recommend his book as well. So here's the latest graph. This was just earlier in 2018. Someone plotted the Arctic rise in temperature against the global rise. The Mauna Loa and the big picture numbers are global, but the Arctic clearly shows it's turning exponential in the increase of temperatures in the Arctic. And I think it probably has impacted the weather in places where many of us live, particularly the Northeast United States. So with that being said, are things getting better? Well, when I ask that question in the abstract, most people say, oh yeah, we got solar panels going in on the neighbors' yards, and we're moving to smaller homes, and we're eating better, and we're driving electric cars, and definitely things are getting better. Well, things are getting better in Santa Barbara, California, but are things getting better in Syria and Africa? And the answer is no. For every American or European that's moving in the direction of a plant-based diet, there's up to 100 people in the developing world moving just as fast as they can in the other direction. So this is a global problem that we have to address with global initiatives. So I liken it to a runaway luxury train. And I tell you what, I'll be first to admit, I don't want to voluntarily give up my luxuries. I'm talking about things that, I'm not a wealthy man, but I enjoy air conditioning. I enjoy indoor plumbing. I enjoy heating. I enjoy an automobile to drive around in. I enjoy airplane travel. These are luxuries. I mean, we saw some pretty basic housing areas driving up to Makaha today. But those are luxurious compared to the billions of the people in the world that have no water. You know, so what we've got here is a runaway luxury train, and I'm going to say 1 or 2 billion people are on that train. Depends on how you define luxury. The other 5 or 6 billion are trying to get on that train just as fast as they can. And so the train keeps going faster and faster, more people getting on the train every day, more comforts are invented, and I'm guilty like everyone else. I don't want to get off the train. I try to, you know, save things as much as I can, but I do know that we need a global solution to this, and that's where I've decided to put my efforts on trying to create awareness for that need. So addressing the world's sustainability nightmare. I call it a case of planet management. If we had one entity that was in charge, controlling everything, and knew all the data and science and figured out what we needed to do, and we followed that leader, that'd be one thing. We don't have that. We have to think about quality of life for all humans. We want everybody to enjoy life, so we have to have a system that everybody can enjoy life. We go back to middle school math, keep it simple, stupid, and figure out something that can work on a global basis. Food choices being crucial. Details, of course, once again, are above my job grade. But Dr. Wilson said in his book, Meaning of Human Existence, we have the wherewithal, we have the knowledge, we have the brain power, we could figure it out. But of all those things, with the runaway train, with religions that can't agree on anything, governments can't agree on anything, it's hard to think about how we're going to do it. But it gets to middle school math, but the obstacles are incredible. So my conclusions about saving our civilization, and you'll be happy to know that I do believe that we still have a chance. But we must address food quickly. So all of us that are helping others learn the secret of food are playing a big role in this. But we must address food quickly. It's not happening soon enough. Can move the needle in 5 years if we did. But we've also got to aggressively address population, consumption, overconsumption, and the fossil fuels, and all that they're causing the problems. So, go back to the food. I want to talk briefly about my 4-leaf plan. I don't know if you know about it, but I created a system called 4-leaf to make it easy for me to describe what a healthy diet was if someone asked me, what should I be eating? And so, should I be eating vegan? And I said, well, vegan is what you don't eat. I want to talk about what you do eat. So what you do eat, I based my definition on Colin Campbell's definition, which was the closer we get to eating a diet of whole plant-based foods, the better off we will be. So I set the top bar at 80. I sat at Colin Campbell's breakfast table and shared the formula with him, and he loved it. He said, that's great. He said, I like seeing something positive. It's not dwelling on, you can't have this, you can't have that, you can't have that. You just maximize the consumption of whole plant-based foods, and by virtue of doing that, your stomach's full and you can't eat some of the bad stuff. So I've created a scale going from 1 leaf, 2 leaf, 3 leaf, 20, 40, 60, 80. And then I pointed out that it's not necessarily vegan or vegetarian. And I did that for 2 reasons. One is, I estimate 90% of the people in this country don't like those terms. They don't want to be one. And you know it better than I do, right? And secondly, they don't describe what you do eat, and they're not necessarily healthy. There's a lot of junk food vegans that are sick, tired, and nearly dead. So focusing on what we do eat, not what we're avoiding. And a lot of people tell me they just like that implied wiggle room. You know, I can have that piece of peanut butter or candy if I want to. So the 4-leaf survey, who has taken the 4-leaf survey? Nobody? Bart. 4-leaf survey, you can easily take it at 4leafsurvey.com in 2 minutes. It has 12 multiple choice questions, and from those questions, those are the questions that are in there. It takes about 2 minutes to take that, and it provides a pretty good estimate for about where you stand on the 4-leaf scale. And so, you know, I've been talking about this stuff for 15 years. I created the 4-leaf survey while I was staying with my daughter in Atlanta, Georgia, and she was raising 2 little girls and had meat and cheese in the refrigerator, and I just never said anything. You know, she knew what I was talking about, but she saw the movie What the Health, and that was 6 months ago. She now scored 32 on the 4-leaf survey. She is a 4-leaf eater, and those 2 little girls, 2 of my granddaughters, are going to have a mom that's going to be teaching them a health-promoting way of life. And that's my daughter and her husband, a Canadian, and that's the Arch of Hockey Sticks. He's a Canadian hockey player. So there's more hurdles about plant-based eating. Humans have always eaten meat. You've heard that, right? They eat meat in the Bible. What about calcium, osteoporosis? I can't live without my burgers, and it's too expensive to eat a healthy diet. Not convenient to eat this way. Well, as a single guy for 17 years between my wife is here tonight, but before I moved in with her, I was 17 years single, and I had to cook everything myself. And when I go out, I'd get something like this. It's like $7, and it's definitely a 3-leaf, if not a 4-leaf meal. Double order vegetables, brown rice. So that's the expense part of it. Certainly convenient. And then I've started doing these recently. Bird's Eye has a line of foods. Some of them are better than others, but none of them have any animal foods in it. None of these. But they do have too much salt in some of them. But this is what I call my 4-4-4 line of foods. That means 4-leaf, 4 minutes, $4. That's my broccoli and cauliflower. I slice that up completely and put it in a bag when I get home from the grocery. So I can start with that frozen meal, which I can cook in the bag and add my seasonings and add my broccoli and a big pile of veggies, because those frozen meals never have enough veggies. They have enough grains, but they don't have enough veggies. So it's not that hard. But food choices are not enough. Getting back to the tipping points of water consumption, climate change, adding all these people every day, the runaway train. So we need one author, in fact, it was Stephen Emmott, the 10 Billion book. He said we need an emergency, a genuine emergency, because we handle emergencies well. We did pretty well in World War II, you know, after we got bombed here in Pearl Harbor. But that was the emergency. Oh my God, we're in this thing now. We got to do something. We came to life. So if we knew today, and Emmott said in his book, if we knew today that 50 years from today there was going to be an asteroid hit that was going to wipe out 80% of life on our Earth, if we knew for a fact where it was going to hit, when it was going to hit, what damage it was going to do, the governments worldwide would marshal the entire planet into unprecedented action. Every scientist, engineer, business, and university would be involved. Everybody would be working on it. But we don't have an emergency. That's what Emmott said in his book. The problem is there is no asteroid and there is no time that it's going to happen. It's just kind of a creeping thing that nobody wants to talk about. So here is something I came up with. Nothing short of a perceived global emergency, perceived, because we got to invent it if we don't have a real one, can influence enough leaders in government, industry, academia, and religion. You got to get all these people on board. And you know, the rest of it, how do you do that? It's above my job grade. So time for some soul searching. How can we learn to live sustainably? adding 230,000 people a day, unbridled consumption. What will it take to stop the madness? So what real progress do you see? And I give this talk, something like it, in universities, and I talk to 20-year-olds, and I say, what are you going to do in your career? Your own research, your career, population control, green energy, monetizing CO2 removal. There's a lot of things we could work on to make it done, and everybody's got to choose how they can contribute here. What can we all do? Be the change we want to see, says Gandhi. Eat mostly whole plants, zero animals, live as green as you possibly can. Raising the awareness is kind of my hot button, and about all the unsustainable situations. One of the things I'm doing with the 4-leaf plan is the ARCH system. This is a system that I named ARCH. It's a computerized system that communicates with every member of an organization. Let's say Amazon has 512,000 employees. We could personally engage with every one of those people with this ARCH system. They would take the 4-leaf survey online. We would keep track of the medicines they were taking, the food they were eating, the cost of their own health care, and we could plot that against the changes in the dietary shifts across departments. And it'd be a really powerful tool that could reach 500,000 people just as easily as it could reach 50 people. That's talking about scalability. So that's something I'm working on. And I say, when we know, people in this room know that you can save a lot of money on health care by eating a whole food plant-based diet. Once the first business gets on board with that, people that don't get on board with that will be unable to compete with those kinds of businesses. So just a few months ago, I have partnered, 4-leaf has now partnered with Switch Healthcare, which is run by an MD, MBA, 28-year oncologist. They are in Seattle, where they can talk about our system with Microsoft, Boeing, Amazon, Berkshire Hathaway, and JP Morgan are now working on a system together to figure out how to reduce the cost of health care. And once we get this proven in an industrial environment, I mean, it could shift the dietary patterns of millions of people, as companies who don't have it won't be able to compete with those who do. So we never give up hope. I've mentioned hope a few times. I hope you haven't given up hope because of some of my comments about the science and history. But Margaret Mead, I agree with what she said, that never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, is the only thing that ever has. And my personal favorite, people who are crazy enough to think that they can change the world are the ones who do. Steve Jobs. The 4-leaf guide has arrived. Mahalo and aloha. Q&A. I intended one of the immersion things for the Whole Food employees. I know McDougall's done some of those. Joel Furman did some, and Scott Stoll, I did one with him down in Florida. They had 200 people. They called it the Fat Farm. You know, they took the high-risk people that were using all the drugs and having the high cost, very high cost of health care per person. And they flew those people from all over the country. They were like, counting spouses, there were like 200 people. And so they're investing $1 million that 1 week in those people just to try to help them promote health and ultimately save money on health care. And I do remember seeing that Whole Foods, the only major employer, I say major being like in the Fortune 1000, that has actually had a slight decline in the cost of health care per person, which is unprecedented. So John Mackey and his team are definitely doing things right, and hopefully they'll want to use our ARCH system to scale a thing to everybody.
So did people drop that program?
She asked how often I speak to people like middle school people and young people, and she mentioned that young people have more open minds, and not biased by all the things we have to worry about. I've only spoken I spoke to another middle school a year or so after that, but it was the same teacher who had brought me in that moved to a different school and brought me in again. In both cases, I got a chance to speak to the entire school. But then we go into the cafeteria right after my talk, and guess what? They got signs, big posters, "Got milk," you know, with the mustache, because they have to. And even though they were serving the snacks because of my talk, they had to put milk in the products, or the school wouldn't do it, because that's the rules the USDA has imposed on us. But she asked about speaking to young people. The most young people I've spoken to have been at the collegiate level, and they get it, and they are very serious about it. And I don't know where it's taken them after I opened their eyes to it, but I got very favorable feedback each time that I spoke. I'm speaking next month at Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts. The players in the healthcare system have no financial incentive for us to get healthy. People say, what about the insurance companies? They'd save money, wouldn't they? And I go back to McDougall's definition of that. When he went to see, he wanted his program, he was working at a hospital up in Northern California back before he did his McDougall program, and he wanted his heart intervention process to be covered by insurance. And it was $5,000. And the heart bypass was, let's say, $100,000. But they wouldn't cover his $5,000 deal. And he said, well, I want to know why. And he brought him in, and several insurance guys, and he said, why don't you cover my program? It works. It's 1/20th the cost. You save all that money. And one of the reps said, hey, Mac, he called him Mac Dougal, you don't get it, do you? You don't understand how the system works. The healthcare, cost of healthcare is like a big pie. Everybody gets a slice. The bigger the pie, the more the insurance company gets. I mean, in a nutshell, that's the whole problem with our healthcare system in a nutshell. So I'd been having that same thought about insurance companies. Oh yeah, they would save. But then eventually there would be no need for an insurance company if nobody got sick. Thank you. Mahalo so much. Appreciate it.
Mahalo for coming, and have a safe return home. Good night, everyone.